Our next speaker is our own MIT's own Max Tegmark, well-known astrophysicist, founder of the Future of Life Institute. Max has been campaigning against the misuse of powerful technologies like artificial intelligence for many years, but is also, a really cogent voice on the danger of an accidental nuclear weapons launch. Max, please take the mic.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's such a pleasure and honor to be here. As a physics professor, of course, I feel a very strong personal responsibility for nuclear weapons, as well as do all of us as physicists, for what we brought into the world here. So let me start by just sharing my screen. So I'm going to be talking about accidental nuclear war, and if there's time, a little bit about what we can do about it as well. And I'd like to start to just ask you this very simple question. Which of these two people here is more famous? So I can see you on gallery view here. So raise your hand if you would say Justin Bieber. Yeah, I think that's pretty much everybody. Now, the second part of this question is, which one of them should we thank for us being able to have this conference today? Because he single-handedly stopped the Soviet nuclear attack on us during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And hint, hint, it's not Canadian, right? So why is this? Why is this that we as a species, for some reason, don't value these things very much? My personal guess is that the main reason is that we just haven't heard about it particularly much. And there are some powerful forces, of course, who prefer that we don't hear very much about it. And I want you to hear about it now from me. And I want your friends to hear from you about how many times we have come all too close to having a nuclear war by mistake. I think if you read the mainstream media, you are left with the impression that the biggest risk we face is a sneak attack from North Korea, or a sneak nuclear attack from Iran, or something along those lines. As a scientist, I find the evidence for this incredibly unconvincing. It's quite clear when you think it through that the probability of you or someone you know getting killed by a nuclear weapon is overwhelming. That probability is overwhelmingly dominated by the risk of Russia dropping a hydrogen bomb or somewhere in the vicinity, or nuclear winter from our own hydrogen bombs, all triggered by an accidental nuclear war. They are much more likely to have, countries don't want to start nuclear wars by mistake, because despite all the brouhaha, they generally know, they've read Alan Robock's research and so on, and know it's bad for their near and dear. But the point is, sometimes we build very complicated systems and bad things happen anyway. So this is how I think about it. After 13.8 billion years of cosmic history on this little spinning ball in space now, interesting things start to happen. We have all these conscious beings writing poetry, singing songs, etc. And for some reason, they also decided to build this remarkable device, which was so complicated to make that it took an enormous number of people from across the world to work hard on it. And it's called the Spectacular Thermonuclear Unpredictable Population Incineration Device. Bit of a mouthful, so we'll just go with an acronym, STUPID. And basically, aside from the intricacies of how it works, it has two knobs that are really what describe its performance. The X is its explosive power, and the P is the probability that it goes off by mistake in any 1 year, right? So the explosive power, as you know, has gone up a lot, and then it's gradually gone down a bit, but it's still absolutely enormous. We have about 13,000 hydrogen bombs on the planet right now, enough to create a nuclear winter that would kill most people on Earth, as you've heard from Alan Robock and Brian Toon and many others. I want to focus on the other knob now, because this is not just powerful, but it has a special cool feature that it just blows up randomly. That's why it's unpredictable, right? And so there are many reasons why that might happen. And to make it a little more concrete, I want to just tell you a few little stories. So I'm going to fire up a little web browser so that you can also show this to your friends in the future. So let me just share my screen a little bit differently here. So if you go to futureoflife.org on your phone or on your laptop in the future, and you just click on where it says nuclear, and then you scroll down a little bit and you see where it says, I said lunch, not launch. You come to this little collection of horror stories that we put together here. If you click on the little full screen button, it looks better. And then you can just go through and see this this stupid device in action. So many examples when we were on the verge of accidentally having nuclear war. I'm just going to highlight a few little ones. Here is when we accidentally dropped. This is actually a hydrogen bomb. Yes, we dropped it on ourselves on North Carolina by mistake. Almost went off. If some nation accidentally nukes themselves, it's not impossible that this would trigger a nuclear war, because it might be pretty confusing who caused it, right? During the Cuban Missile Crisis, when everybody was on high alert, there were a number of incidents that were very, very scary, like when a Cuban commander decided to shoot down a U-2 aircraft over Cuba, even though the US had decided that that was going to be a trigger for war. Let's get to the Vasily Arkhipov here. So there's a fantastic documentary I recommend spending an hour watching if you haven't, on PBS, linked from here. But basically, Vasily Arkhipov was on this submarine that was sent by the Soviets to Cuba secretly. And the US intercepted it and started dropping practice depth charges on it to try to force it to the surface. Now, if you've seen Dr. Strangelove or any movie really with accidental nuclear war, you know it's always miscommunication that causes the greatest risk. So the Americans didn't know, first of all, that this submarine had a nuclear weapon on board, a nuclear torpedo. The Americans also didn't know that their batteries were failing and temperatures were 40, 50 Celsius, 110 Fahrenheit or more, and they were running out of oxygen. So sailors were fainting on board. It was a truly apocalyptic atmosphere. And they also didn't know that they had authorization to launch this torpedo without contact with Moscow, which they hadn't had for a long time. So when suddenly they started hearing these enormous explosions, the captain, Savitsky, was pretty convinced that World War III had started. And he decided, okay, we're not gonna disgrace our Navy. We are gonna destroy the US Navy and launch the torpedo. 3 people needed to reach consensus about this. The Communist Party political officer also said yes. And the third guy who was there, Vasily Arkhipov, fortunately for us, was level-headed enough to say no. I don't think we want to cut it that close. And as you'll see, this was just one out of so many examples. As we go forward in time, coming a little bit closer to the present, things keep happening. We heard just earlier here from President Nixon, we were really afraid that he was so alcoholic during his final few days that he might do something really dumb. So we had at our MIT conference here, our former Secretary of Defense, William Perry, a few years ago, and he told us how he was woken up once at 4 in the morning by generals saying, hey, get up, World War III is starting. We have all these incoming Soviet missiles, we have to launch back. Now, not the greatest way to start the day, right? He hadn't even had coffee, right? That was caused by a computer error. Then I'm not going to go through all of them. Obviously, the Russians have plenty of computer errors also. Stanislav Petrov was on charge in an early warning station outside Moscow when he saw when there were 5 incoming nuclear missiles detected. And he, remarkably, just on gut feeling, decided to not report this to his superiors. This is something which could easily have escalated also into a nuclear war. There's another beautiful movie about this. In fact, we at the Future Life Institute tracked down Stanislav Petrov's family and Vasily Arkhipov's family. They were both living in relative poverty outside Moscow, and brought them to the West and gave them each $50,000 reward, because we felt we really need to celebrate people like this. But of course, as a species, it's a pretty dumb idea to just always rely on luck and there being the right person present at the right time. And these things keep happening. After the Cold War ended, the Norwegians launched a weather rocket, and through miscommunication, the Russians didn't know that. Looked like it was a missile going towards Moscow. Boris Yeltsin was we're bringing in the nuclear football. And of course, the reason that we aren't seeing as many things very, very recently isn't because they're not happening. It's because they haven't had time to get declassified yet, right? A lot of things get declassified after 5 years, or after 50 years, rather. So in summary, these things keep happening. And the way I would encourage you to all think about this is, let me just come back to my slides here. We're basically playing Russian roulette as a species, right? There's some probability every year that we're going to have an accidental nuclear war and nuclear winter. And we don't know, because we can quibble about if the probability is 2% per year or 4% or 1%. It doesn't really matter for the conclusion, because if you're a nerd like myself who loves to think about statistics, the probability that we are not going to have a nuclear war, if you wait and look at plotted as a function of time, looks like this. The probability we will have a war approaches 100%. The probability we don't have a nuclear war drops to 0 exponentially. And you don't need to know any statistics to realize that if you're just playing Russian roulette you do once per day or whatever, you're not going to last very long. That's what we're doing as a species. So what do we do about this? I think the number one reason why this creates absolute madness is persisting is because most people have never heard of these incidents and accidents. Now, I have a message for all of you in your disarmament advocacy. Don't tell people about statistics. Tell people stories. That's what I tried to do a little bit today here. These are stories. They're absolutely gripping stories, captivating stories. They're even stories with a happy ending, which are the ones that people usually like the most. Go to our website, read about some of these stories, and share them with your friends. Because the more people become aware of these stories, the more people become aware that they themselves are at risk of getting killed, because we have this completely out of control, gigantic, unpredictable system that, going on. The more likely they are to actually want to do the useful things that the rest of you have been talking about at this conference to reduce the amount of nuclear weapons craziness in the world. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Max, for that chilling exposition. I'll tell you, the number of these accidents is really quite extraordinary. All right, let's